He looked straight at me in front of the judge and whispered that he would take everything, from my money to the child growing inside me. I simply nodded. He had no idea that the silent man sitting behind me owned the very building he was using to display his power. By tonight, every piece of evidence he fabricated will turn around and destroy his own career. My name is Mara Lane. I stood in the center of the Port Sterling family court, feeling the weight of the silence pressing against my chest. I was 32 years old, and the child growing inside me was just 5 months along, a quiet flutter against the tension that filled the room. This was supposed to be a standard hearing for temporary assets and custody, but the atmosphere suggested an execution. Evan Holt stood to my left. He looked immaculate. He wore his charcoal suit like a second skin, the kind of outfit worn by a man who had already decided he was the winner long before the gavel banged. He leaned over the polished mahogany railing, invading my personal space just enough to be heard, but not enough to alert the bailiff. "I'll take everything from you," he whispered. The words were soft, like a lover's secret, but they carried the weight of a guillotine. Then he pulled back and smiled at the judge, a practiced expression of pained concern, as if he were performing for a camera crew that only he could see. His lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Sterling, cleared his throat and began his opening salvo. "Your Honor, we are requesting an immediate restraining order and full temporary financial control. Mrs. Lane is unstable. We have documentation of reckless spending, erratic behavior, and recently a violent trespassing incident at Mr. Holt's company gala." I did not flinch. I kept my hands folded over my stomach. I realized then that this was not a separation. This was a scripted humiliation. Evan did not just want to leave me. He wanted to paint me as a hysterical, dangerous woman so he could strip the assets and take the baby. It was a strategy designed to break me before I could even speak. The judge pushed her glasses up her nose and looked down at Evan's legal team. "Those are serious accusations. Do you have evidence of this alleged trespassing and data theft?" Evan nodded to his lawyer with a confident, almost bored arrogance. He thought the trap was snapped shut. He thought I was the same woman who cooked his dinner and believed his lies about late-night meetings. I stepped forward before his lawyer could open his briefcase. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "I do not wish to waste the court's time with arguments. I simply ask permission to submit a chain of evidence authenticated by the building's internal security system." Evan let out a short, scoffing laugh. It was a sound meant to belittle, a sound that said I was bluffing. He turned his head away, dismissing me. At that exact second, my phone buzzed against my palm. I glanced down. A single message flashed on the screen. "Record is ready." If he said the line, "Push it." I took a slow breath and turned my head slightly to look at the gallery behind me. In the back row, sitting as still as a stone statue, was an older man in a gray suit. He did not look like a lawyer or a witness. He looked like consequences. He gave me a single, imperceptible nod. A wave of unnatural calm washed over me. I turned back to the judge. Evan was still smiling that condescending smile, unaware that the ground beneath his feet had already been sold. "Your Honor," I said, looking Evan dead in the eye, "before we review the footage from the building security, I would like to ask the court's indulgence. To understand the evidence, I need to tell you exactly where this began. I need to take you back to the night my husband decided to turn me into a joke in front of hundreds of people. 3 years ago, the air at the Port Sterling harbor smelled of salt water and the cheap white wine they were serving at the fundraiser. It was a charity event for marine preservation, the kind of gathering where people wore name tags and made polite conversation while checking their watches. I was there simply as Mara Lane, a freelance copywriter living in a rented one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. I had stripped away the heavy velvet curtain of my family history to see if I could breathe on my own. That was the night Evan found me. He was not the polished shark in the charcoal suit back then. He was wearing a jacket that was slightly too tight across the shoulders and a tie that he kept loosening with nervous energy. He found me hiding near the shrimp cocktail station. I bet you $5 that the mayor is going to mention synergy in the next 2 minutes, he said, leaning in with a conspiratorial grin. I laughed, surprised by his sudden closeness. I don't have $5 to lose. Then I'll buy you a drink instead, he replied. His eyes were warm, crinkling at the corners. They were the eyes of a dreamer, not a predator. Later that night, as we walked along the pier, he told me about his life. He spoke about growing up with nothing and his desperate need to build something that mattered. I don't care about the money. Mara, he told me, looking out at the dark water, I want to look at a skyline and know I helped shape it. I want to leave a mark. I fell for it. I fell for the hunger in his voice because it felt honest. I was so used to men who looked at me and saw a bank account or a stepping stone to the board of directors. Evan just saw a girl who wrote marketing copy and drove a 6-year-old sedan. I kept my secret buried deep. I never mentioned that the pier we were walking on was part of a trust fund my grandfather established. I never told him that Mara Lane was a truncated version of a name that opened doors in this city without knocking. Our courtship was a blur. It moved with the speed of a man running out of time. We were engaged within 4 months and married 2 months after that in a small civil ceremony. It was perfect in its simplicity. I felt cherished. I felt chosen. For the first time in my life, I was being loved without being weighed and measured. But the cracks appeared so slowly that I mistook them for settling foundations. It started when he began fixating on the North Marsh Development Alliance. It was a massive real estate conglomerate that was aggressively buying up the city. If I can just get in with North Marsh, he would say over dinner, his fork scraping loudly against the plate, it would change everything. They are the future. Mara, he began asking about my family. I had told him my father was a retired consultant named Gideon who spent his days fishing and hated visitors. I kept them apart, terrified that my father's sharp eyes would see something in Evan that I was refusing to acknowledge. One evening, about 6 months into our marriage, we were walking past an old warehouse district near the docks. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the brickwork. Evan stopped and stared at a dilapidated building. "This place is a gold mine," he murmured. Then he turned to me, and for a second, the warmth was gone from his face. It was replaced by a cold, calculating assessment. "You grew up around here, right, do you? Do you happen to know who holds the deed to this block? It's not listed in the public records." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. "I have no idea." "Evan, why would I?" He held my gaze for a second too long. Then he blinked, and the charming, goofy smile returned. "Just curious, a guy can dream." "Right." He wrapped his arm around my shoulders and squeezed, but his grip felt mechanical. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that ambition was not a crime. I desperately wanted to believe in the version of Evan who bought me wildflowers from the grocery store, not the man who looked at a building like he wanted to dissect it. But looking back, I realized that was the moment the seed was planted. I was not afraid of being poor. I was not afraid of struggling. I was only afraid that I had fallen in love with a man who looked at our marriage and saw a business merger. I was afraid I had signed a contract when I thought I was writing a vow. When Evan finally got his foot in the door at North Marsh, we celebrated with a bottle of sparkling wine that cost $12. He cried that night, holding me, telling me that we were a team and that he was doing this for us. But power is a strange filter. It does not just change what you see. It changes who you are. The transformation was subtle at first, then absolute. Within 6 months, the man who used to make coffee for me in the morning was replaced by a stranger who checked his emails before he even opened his eyes. His circle of friends shifted. The old college buddies were gone, replaced by men in Italian suits who laughed too loud and checked their reflections in shop windows. And then there was Kendra Vale. Kendra was the director of public relations at Northmarsh. She was sharp, blonde, and managed to occupy every room she entered. She appeared in every company photo standing right next to Evan. The first time I met her at a mixer, she looked me up and down and smiled. "Oh, you must be Mara," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Evan says you're very domestic. That is so quaint." It was around this time that Evan began to tighten the vise on our finances. He sat me down one evening with a spreadsheet. "We are bleeding money. Mara," he said, pointing at the grocery bill. "You need to cut the household spending by 30%. I am trying to build a future here, and you are buying organic berries." I nodded, feeling a knot of guilt. I canceled my subscriptions. I stopped buying new clothes. I walked instead of taking cabs. Yet, while I was counting pennies, Evan came home with a new watch that I knew cost at least $4,000. When I asked, he snapped that it was a necessary investment for his image. Then came the baby. I found out on a Tuesday. I waited until he was home, hoping to see a spark of the old Evan. When I told him, the room went silent. He did not hug me. He did not smile. He rubbed his temples as if I had just told him I crashed the car. This is the worst possible timing," he muttered, pacing the living room. "I am up for the vice president seat in 3 months. A crying baby. A distracted wife. This is... God, Mara. Why didn't you be more careful? That hurt more than the budget cuts." After that, the isolation began. He stopped taking me to events. "You just don't fit the vibe. Mara," he said while adjusting his silk tie. "It's high energy. You're too quiet." He started sleeping on the sofa, claiming he had late calls, but he guarded his phone like it contained nuclear codes. I was cleaning his jacket one afternoon when a receipt fell out of the pocket. It was from the Obsidian Lounge, a dinner for 2, costing $350, on a night he said he was working late. Then I found the credit card statement he thought he had hidden. There was a charge for the romantic getaway package at the St. Regis, and a purchase from a jeweler downtown for $2,000. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the papers in his face. But then, 2 days later, I saw it. I was scrolling through social media, and there was a photo of Kendra Vale. She was at a gala, laughing, her head thrown back. Around her neck was a delicate gold pendant shaped like a teardrop. It was the exact same necklace I had pointed out to Evan 3 months ago, the one he had laughed at and said was a waste of money. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and turned off a switch. The tears stopped. The confusion vanished. I did not confront him. I did not beg. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a hidden folder. I hired Roy Keenan, a private investigator with a cheap office and a reputation for discretion. I gave him the dates. I gave him the names. I told him I just wanted to know who, where, and when. A week later, Roy slid a manila envelope across the table of a diner. He looked tired. "Lady, you have a problem," Roy said, his voice low and gravelly. "I got the photos of him and the blonde. That's standard, but look at the rest." He tapped a photo of Evan handing a thick folder to a man in a gray coat in a parking garage. "He isn't just cheating on you," Roy whispered. "Your husband is doing something that puts people in prison." The photographs of Evan and Kendra touching hands over a candlelight dinner were painful, but they were cliché. They were the standard debris of a failing marriage. The real horror lay in the grainy shots taken in the underground parking structure of the Meridian building. In these images, Evan was not looking at a woman with lust. He was looking at a man in a gray trench coat with fear in his hand. He held a thick, sealed file folder. Roy tapped the picture with a calloused finger. "I ran the plates on the gray sedan," he said, his voice low. "It belongs to a subsidiary of the Hearthline Group. They are Northmarsh's biggest rival for the riverfront contract. Your husband isn't just stepping out on you. He is feeding trade secrets to the enemy." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I went home and pulled up our shared digital calendar. I cross-referenced the dates on the photos with his schedule. Every single meeting labeled Investor Roundtable or Late Strategy Session aligned perfectly with the timestamps on Roy's surveillance. He was not working late to build our future. He was selling it piece by piece. I needed one more confirmation. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the Hotel Vimeo, the location of his last business trip. I pitched my voice an octave higher, adopting the brisk, cheerful tone of an administrative professional. "Good morning," I said. "This is Sarah, Mr. Holt's assistant. He is worried he left a charger in the room from his stay last Tuesday. Could you check for me?" The receptionist put me on hold for 2 minutes. When she returned, her voice was helpful. We checked the suite, but housekeeping didn't find a charger. "We hope Mr. Holt enjoyed the romance package. Though, did the champagne arrive on time?" It was perfect. "Thank you," I managed to say before hanging up. The romance package. Champagne. While I was at home researching cribs and worrying about our savings, he was drinking vintage brut with the woman who was helping him destroy me. The urge to scream, to throw his clothes onto the lawn and burn them, was overwhelming. But I stopped. I realized that if I exploded now, if I acted on my rage, I would simply be fulfilling the narrative he was writing. I would be the crazy wife. I would be the liability. I needed armor. I used a private account that Evan did not know existed to hire Delaney Cross. Delaney was not a strip mall divorce attorney. She was a shark who swam in the deep waters of high-asset litigation and reputation management. Her office was glass and steel, cold and impenetrable. Delaney listened to my story without blinking. She looked at the photos, the calendar logs, and the financial records I had printed out. "Here is the reality, Mara," Delaney said, leaning forward. "If he can paint you as unstable, the court will grant him temporary financial control. He will freeze you out. He will use your emotional reaction to argue that you are unfit to parent. We cannot give him a single inch of erratic behavior." I nodded, my hands resting on my stomach. "I can be quiet. I can be invisible." "Good," she said, "because we need to wait for him to make a mistake." The mistake came sooner than we thought, but it came with a terrifying realization. Late that night, I received an encrypted message from an old contact of my father's, a risk manager who still worked inside the North Marsh infrastructure. He did not know who I was married to, but he knew I was a shareholder in the trust that owned their building. The message was short. "Internal audit is flagging a massive data leak on the riverfront bid. They are looking for a scapegoat. Executive team is panicking." I stared at the screen and the pieces clicked together with a sickening clarity. Evan was not just hiding assets. He was not just cheating. He knew the investigation was coming. He needed someone to blame for the missing data. He needed someone with access to his home. Someone he could paint as jealous, erratic, and vindictive enough to sabotage him. He was not just planning to divorce me. He was planning to frame me for corporate espionage to keep himself out of prison. I was not the wife he was leaving. I was the hole he was digging to bury his crimes. The invitation arrived by courier on a Thursday afternoon. It was a heavy square of cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering that read, "The Solstice Gala at the Glasshaven Conservatory." Evan had not mentioned it to me. He had likely assumed I would stay home, hidden away like a shameful secret while he played the part of the rising corporate star. But as I ran my thumb over the textured paper, I felt a cold sense of opportunity. I opened my laptop and logged into the secure family server using a VPN, a habit I had abandoned years ago but picked up again as easily as breathing. I navigated to the Property Assets folder. The Glasshaven Conservatory was the newest jewel in the city's architectural crown, a massive structure of steel and glass designed to house rare botanicals. It was listed as a holding of the Astor Meridian Trust. I stared at the screen. The board of trustees for that trust consisted of exactly 3 people: my father, his attorney, and me. I picked up the phone and dialed the private line of the head of building security, a man who had worked for my father for 20 years. "I need a favor," I said, keeping my voice low. "Tonight, for the gala, I need every camera feed in the main hall and the VIP rooms mirrored to an external server, real-time backup, read-only access for the venue staff. No one inside North Marsh is allowed to delete a single second of footage." "It will be done, Miss Lane," he replied. "Do you want us to intervene?" "No," I said. "Just watch." I began to dress. I could have worn something from my pre-marriage life, a gown that cost more than Evan's car, but that would have ruined the trap. I needed to be the version of Mara that Evan despised. I chose a simple navy dress from a department store rack, one that was 3 years old and slightly faded. I wore sensible flats and pulled my hair back into a loose, unstyled bun. I looked plain. I looked like I did not belong. I looked like a liability. I packed my clutch with surgical precision. Inside, there were 3 items. First, the divorce papers, drafted but not yet filed. Second, a silver USB drive containing the evidence of the data leak and Evan's illicit transactions with the Hearthline Group. Third, the timeline Roy had constructed, detailing every lie Evan had told for the past 18 months. Before I left the house, I replayed Delaney's voice in my head. We had sat in her office 2 hours ago, the city lights flickering below us. "Listen to me, Mara," she had said, gripping her pen tight. Do not attack them. If you scream, you lose. If you cry, you lose. You have to be a statue. Let them feel safe. Let them think they have won. They have to commit the crime in front of the lens. You are just the bait." I took a cab to the venue. The structure rose out of the park like a glowing crystal ship, lit from within by thousands of LED lights. The line of limousines stretched for 2 blocks. As I stepped onto the pavement, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from a number I did not recognize, but I knew the sender. "Don't react. Let them go further. Camera is watching." I slipped the phone into my pocket. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and adrenaline. I was walking into a lion's den armed only with silence and a cheap handbag. But as I passed the security checkpoint and saw the heavy doors swing open, the fear began to calcify into something harder. They thought I was coming here to beg for my marriage. They thought I was coming to make a scene out of desperation. They were wrong. I was not walking in to ask for love. I was walking in to take back my power. The interior of the Glasshaven Conservatory was blinding. It was a cathedral of transparent walls and steel beams, filled with the hum of jazz music and the clinking of crystal flutes. The air smelled of expensive perfume and chilled champagne. Hundreds of people moved in a sea of silk and velvet, a kaleidoscope of wealth and influence. And then there was me. In my faded navy dress and sensible shoes, I looked like a spill of dark ink on a pristine white tablecloth. Evan spotted me almost immediately. His face went pale, drained of blood, before flushing with a violent shade of red. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbing my elbow with a grip that was tight enough to bruise. He dragged me into the shadow of a decorative palm tree, hissing through his teeth. What the hell are you doing here?" he whispered, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You are going to ruin my promotion. You look like a maid. Stand back. Stay silent. Do not speak to anyone." Before I could answer, Kendra Vale materialized. She was wearing a shimmering silver gown that looked like liquid mercury. She did not look at Evan. She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with a predatory amusement. She raised her glass, drawing the attention of the executive group standing nearby. "Oh, look who decided to join us," Kendra said, her voice carrying over the music. "Everyone, this is Evan's wife, Mara. She is not really into the corporate world. She prefers the simple life. You know, cooking, scrubbing floors, domestic things." A ripple of polite, confused laughter moved through the group. A young event coordinator with a headset hurried over, glancing at my dress and then at the VIP badge around Kendra's neck. "Excuse me," the coordinator said, blocking my path. "The VIP area isn't for staff. Catering needs to use the north entrance." I saw phones go up. The cameras were recording. The humiliation was starting to trend. Suddenly, the music dipped. The master of ceremonies tapped his microphone on the main stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fun little tradition tonight for our newest rising stars. Let's welcome Mrs. Mara Holt to the stage for her welcome gift." My name flashed on the massive LED screen behind him. Mara Lane, domestic support. It was a joke, a scripted, cruel joke. The spotlight swung around and pinned me against the glass wall. I had no choice. I walked up the stairs, my legs feeling heavy as lead. A server brought out a large box wrapped in North Marsh blue. "Open it." Someone shouted from the back. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were a pair of yellow rubber gloves, a bottle of industrial bleach, and an apron with the words "The Help" printed in glittery sequins. The room exploded into laughter. It was a roar of sound, a tidal wave of mockery. I stood there, freezing cold, staring at the gloves. Then came the escalation. Kendra stepped up next to me, holding a glass of red wine. She tilted her hand, and the dark liquid splashed onto the white stage floor, right at my feet. She snapped her fingers, and a server handed her a mop. She shoved the handle into my hands. "Well," Kendra smiled, playing to the crowd, "it's what you're good at, isn't it? Clean it up, honey?" I looked at Evan. He was standing in the front row. He was not rushing to save me. He was laughing. He held his hands up to the people around him and shrugged. "It is just a bit of fun," Evan called out, his voice smooth. "She has no sense of humor." A sharp cramp twisted in my stomach. The stress was hitting the baby. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to collapse. I looked up, past the blinding lights, and found the small black dome of the security camera on the far wall. I stared right into the lens. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Good. Let them hang themselves. I did not move the mop. I just stood there, clutching the handle like a staff. The laughter began to die down, replaced by an awkward tension. I was not playing along. Kendra sensed the mood shifting. She needed a villain. She pointed a manicured finger at my clutch bag. "Security!" She screamed, her voice shrill and sudden. "She is trembling. She has something in her bag. I think she is recording us. She has stolen confidential data." The crowd gasped. The laughter turned into judgment. In seconds, I went from a joke to a criminal. They were ready to sentence me right there on the stage. A heavy-set security officer with a North Marsh laminated badge swinging from his neck charged up the stairs. He moved with a clumsiness that felt rehearsed. As he reached me, he stumbled forward, his shoulder slamming hard into my side. It looked like an accident to the crowd, but I felt the deliberate invasion of his hand. In the split second of contact, he slid a cold, rectangular object into the outer pocket of my clutch. I felt the weight of it settle against my thigh. He had planted a silver USB drive. The trap was physically set. Evan leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. I expected him to defend me, to tell the guard to back off. Instead, his voice was a hiss of pure cowardice. "Just apologize to Kendra," he whispered, gripping my arm. "Give the bag to them. Don't make this a bigger scene than it already is." That was the moment the last thread of my marriage snapped. He saw a guard assault his pregnant wife, and his only instinct was to protect the company narrative. He was not just a bad husband, he was a co-conspirator. Kendra did not waste a second. She grabbed the microphone, her voice booming through the speakers with a practiced urgency. "We have reason to believe this woman has bypassed our security protocols. We suspect she has stolen proprietary data. This is a severe security threat to the company." She looked at Evan, cueing him for his line. Evan took the microphone, his face a mask of tragic reluctance. He looked at the silent crowd, then at me, and shook his head. I am so sorry, everyone," Evan said, his voice breaking perfectly. "I'm not sure she is stable. She has been imagining things lately." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The mockery turned to pity for him and fear of me. I was no longer the poor, clumsy wife. I was the unhinged, dangerous woman who had to be contained. The crowd took a collective step back. The guard reached for my bag. "I need to secure the evidence." "Ma'am!" Kendra was practically vibrating with triumph. She wanted to pull that silver drive out in front of the cameras and end my life. She wanted the kill shot. My phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down. A video file had just finished downloading from the external server. It was a high-angle shot, crystal clear. It showed the guard's approach. It showed the fake stumble. It showed his hand clearly inserting the silver drive into my pocket. It was undeniable. I did not pull the bag away. I did not scream. I looked at the guard, then at Kendra, and finally at Evan. My pulse slowed down to a rhythmic thud. "Open it," I said, my voice calm enough to cut through the static. Evan blinked, confused by my lack of panic. "Go ahead." I continued, raising my voice so the front row could hear. "Open the bag. Find what you planted. But when you pull it out, make sure you hold it up for that camera right there." I pointed to the black dome lens mounted on the steel beam above us. Kendra frowned. "What are you talking about?" Before she could finish the sentence, the warm, ambient lighting of the gala died. The jazz music cut out with a sharp screech of feedback. For a heartbeat, the room was pitch black. Then, the overhead service lights slammed on. They were harsh, blinding white floodlights used for construction and cleaning. The romantic atmosphere evaporated, replaced by the stark, unforgiving glare of an interrogation room. A heavy, mechanical clank echoed from the back of the hall. The massive steel doors to the VIP sector, which had been locked all night, began to grind open. The crowd turned around. The North Marsh private security team, the ones who had been menacing me seconds ago, suddenly froze. They looked at the door and saw the building's internal security force men in dark suits with earpieces marching in. They did not look like they were there to serve drinks. They lined up in 2 perfect rows, creating a corridor for someone to enter. They stood at attention, the way soldiers stand for a general. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a room that realized the predator had just become the prey. The master of ceremonies, a man who had been cracking jokes at my expense just seconds ago, was now clutching his microphone with trembling hands. He looked towards the open doors, his face drained of color. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, his voice cracking. Please welcome the owner of this facility and the chairman of Astor Meridian Trust, Mr. Gideon Whitlock." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Beside me, Evan went rigid. I saw the blood drain from his face, leaving him a shade of sickly gray. He worshipped Gideon Whitlock. He had quoted Gideon's business strategies in his wedding vows. He had a framed article about Gideon's acquisition tactics on his office wall. But in that moment, as the man in the dark suit walked toward the stage flanked by legal counsel and a private security detail, Evan still did not understand. He did not know that the name on my birth certificate was Mara Lane Whitlock. My father walked with a silence that was louder than any shout. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at the trembling executives. He stopped at the edge of the stage and looked up. His eyes swept over the yellow rubber gloves, the bottle of bleach, and the apron with the "help" sequined across the front. Then, he looked at me. The iron hardness in his face melted for just a fraction of a second, replaced by a deep, sorrowful apology. Kendra saw that look. I saw the realization dawn on her face, the terrifying understanding that she had just handed a mop to the wrong woman. My father turned to the terrified MC, but his voice was projected clearly enough for every person in the hall to hear. "I have a question," he said, his tone conversational but deadly. "Why is my daughter standing next to a mop?" The word daughter sucked the air out of the room. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Evan stumbled back a step, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He looked from me to Gideon, the pieces of his shattered reality finally crashing together. Kendra, desperate and cornered, tried to scream over the rising murmur. She is trespassing. She stole data. We found a drive in her bag. She is a threat to this company. My father did not even turn to face her. He simply raised a hand and snapped his fingers. "Screen," he ordered. The massive LED wall behind us, which had been displaying my name as a joke, flickered. The feed switched instantly to the security footage I had requested. It was high definition and undeniable. The video showed the last 3 minutes in agonizing detail. It showed Kendra handing the silver USB drive to the security guard. It showed the guard walking up the stairs. It showed the deliberate stumble, the invasion of my personal space, and the clear motion of his hand sliding the drive into my clutch. The crowd let out a sound that was half gasp, half groan. It was the sound of 300 people realizing they had been complicit in a crime. "That is a plant," my father said coldly. "Now, play the audio from the green room. 2 days ago." The screen went black, and audio filled the hall. It was crystal clear. "She is too stupid to notice." Kendra's voice sneered from the speakers. "We frame her for the leak, and you get to look like the suffering husband." Then came Evan's voice, the voice I had loved, the voice I had trusted. "If we pin the data theft on her, I can prove she is unstable. The court will give me full financial control. I can take the house, the accounts, and I can get full custody. I will take everything." The recording cut off. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Evan stood frozen, staring at the floor, unable to lift his head. He was stripped bare. His ambition, his cruelty, his fraud, it was all there, magnified on a 20-foot screen. My father stepped up onto the stage and stood beside me. He did not order his men to arrest them. He did not scream. He simply looked out at the sea of phones and cameras that were still recording. "You have all just filmed a staged entrapment," Gideon said, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "And just so you know, every second of data from tonight has already been backed up to my private servers." The Solstice Gala did not end with handcuffs clicking around Evan's wrists. That would have been too messy, too chaotic. Delaney Cross, my attorney, advised me to let him walk out of the Glasshaven Conservatory that night. "If we arrest him now, it looks like a personal vendetta." Delaney had warned me as we watched Evan flee the building through a service exit. "We need the police to pick him up on a warrant based on financial forensic evidence. Not a scene at a party. We let him think he has a chance to spin this. And spin it he did. Within 48 hours, Evan went on a scorched earth offensive. He did not hide in shame. Instead, he contacted every tabloid and legal blog in Port Sterling. He painted a picture of himself as the victim of a colossal fraud. His narrative was simple and vicious. I was a pathological liar who had used a fake identity to entrap him into marriage. He claimed that if he had known I was a Whitlock, the heiress to the Astor Meridian fortune, he never would have signed the prenuptial agreement. He was positioning himself as a simple, hard-working man who had been duped by a bored billionaire's daughter playing house. "He is trying to void the prenup based on fraud," Delaney said, tossing a legal brief onto her mahogany desk. "He wants to argue that the marriage itself was entered into under false pretenses so he can claim half of your actual trust fund." At the same time, the alliance between Evan and Kendra collapsed into a violent civil war. Kendra's lawyers issued a statement claiming she was coerced by Evan, her superior, into participating in the humiliation scheme. Evan's team fired back, leaking emails that suggested Kendra was the mastermind who seduced him to get close to my family's connections. They were two rats in a sinking cage, tearing each other apart to survive. Then came the legal blow that took my breath away. I received a notification that Evan had filed an emergency ex parte motion. He was requesting an immediate freeze on our joint accounts and, more disgustingly, a court-ordered psychological evaluation for me. He was doubling down on the unstable wife narrative. He cited my appearance at the gala, claiming I had staged the mop incident myself as proof that I was suffering from a prenatal breakdown and was unfit to parent. But the knife twisted deeper when I opened the discovery files Delaney had compiled. Buried in the credit reports was a loan I had never seen. It was a high-interest private loan for $50,000, secured against a rental property lease. The signature at the bottom was mine, or rather, it was a shaky, traced imitation of my signature. He forged my name, I whispered, my finger hovering over the ink on the photocopy. He took out debt in my name to make it look like I was recklessly spending money I didn't have. Delaney nodded, her expression grim. It is not just debt, Mara. It is a felony. And we traced where the money went. She slid a flowchart across the desk. The $50,000 had moved through 3 shell accounts before landing in an offshore holding company linked to the Hearthline Group. He used your credit to pay his buy-in fee to the competition. He made you pay for his own treason. I felt a cold shiver of fear. It was so calculated, so evil. I looked over at my father, Gideon, who was sitting in the corner of the office, staring out at the city skyline. He looked like a storm cloud contained in a suit. Dad, I said softly, if we go into court with your team in your power, the judge might just see a rich girl crushing her husband. Evan will play the underdog. He will tell the world we bought the verdict. Gideon turned his chair slowly. His eyes were hard. I can end this tonight. Mara, I can make one phone call, and Evan Holt will never work in this hemisphere again. We don't have to go to court. I can crush him in a night. It was tempting. God, it was tempting to let my father wipe Evan off the map. But I shook my head. No, I said firmly. If you do that, he becomes a martyr. He becomes the victim of the big, bad Whitlock empire. I need the world to see him for what he is. I need to win this because I am right, not because I am rich. I picked up the black pen and pulled the final divorce petition toward me. I checked the box for full legal and physical custody. I checked the box requesting a forensic audit of all marital assets. And I checked the box demanding a restraining order. Let him come to court, I said, signing my name, my real name at the bottom. He is going to stand there and tell the judge he wants to take everything. I want him to say it, because I want him to hear the answer when the gavel comes down. We were back in the suffocating quiet of the courtroom. The air conditioner hummed, a low drone that did nothing to cool the heat rising from Evan's collar. He stood before the judge, straightened his tie, and repeated the demand that had started this entire nightmare. Your Honor, Evan said, his voice smooth and practiced. I am requesting full temporary control of our marital assets and sole custody of our unborn child. My wife is unwell. She is a danger to herself and our financial stability. His lawyer, Mr. Sterling, stepped forward and placed a plastic evidence bag on the bench. Inside sat the silver USB drive from the gala. We found this in Mrs. Quinholt's possession during a corporate event. Mr. Sterling announced, it contains stolen proprietary data. This proves her erratic, criminal behavior. My attorney, Delaney Cross, did not flinch. She simply tapped her tablet. Your Honor, before you rule on that evidence, I ask you to view the security footage from the venue. Not the edited clip Mr. Holt provided, but the continuous feed. The screen in the courtroom flickered to life. The video was undeniable. It showed the gala in high definition. It showed the security guard stumbling. It showed his hand clearly sliding the silver drive into my open clutch. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing behind her spectacles. She watched the frame-by-frame replay of the entrapment. This "This looks like a plant," the judge said, her voice turning cold. "It is a plant, Your Honor," Delaney stated firmly. "And it was orchestrated by Mr. Holt." Evan shifted on his feet, his confidence beginning to crack. But Delaney was not finished. She pulled up the loan documents. "Mr. Holt claims my client is financially reckless," Delaney continued. "He cites a $50,000 high-interest loan taken out in her name. However, we have a forensic handwriting analysis confirming that the signature on this document is a forgery. The IP logs show the loan was applied for from a computer in Mr. Holt's office, while my client was at a prenatal checkup." The judge turned her gaze to Evan. It was not a friendly look. Delaney then played the audio recording from the gala, the one where Evan and Kendra laughed about making me look unstable to win custody. The courtroom went silent. The sound of Evan's voice plotting to gaslight his pregnant wife filled the room like a toxic gas. Panic seized Evan. He slammed his hand on the table, abandoning his calm facade. "She is the liar. She deceived me. She never told me she was a Whitlock. She entered this marriage under a false identity. She is the fraud." I stood up. My legs were shaking, but my voice was not. I used my middle name because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for my father's money. I wanted a marriage. Evan, you wanted a merger. The judge looked down at Evan over her glasses. "Mr. Holt, let me clarify something. Did you know about your wife's family wealth when you handed her a mop in front of 300 people?" Evan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He froze. If he said yes, he was a monster. If he said no, his argument about being tricked into signing the prenup fell apart because he had abused me before he knew I was a target. I, he stammered. He did not know. Delaney interrupted, delivering the final blow. But here is what he did know. This file contains proof that Mr. Holt has been selling Northmarsh trade secrets to the Hearthline Group. He forged the loan in my client's name to pay his buy-in fee for corporate espionage. The judge slammed her gavel down. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "I have heard enough," the judge declared. "Mr. Holt, your motion for financial control is denied. I am granting Mrs. Holt full temporary custody and a protective order. Furthermore, I am forwarding this evidence of fraud and forgery to the district attorney's office. You are to have no access to marital funds effective immediately." Evan slumped against the table. He looked small. He looked broken. As the bailiff moved to escort us out, Evan turned to me. His eyes were wide and wet with tears. "Mara, please," he whispered, reaching a hand out. I stopped and looked at him one last time. I felt nothing. No anger, no love, just a profound sense of relief. "You said you would take everything," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "But the only thing you managed to take from me was my illusion of you." I turned my back on him and walked out of the heavy wooden doors, stepping into the bright, clean air of the afternoon, leaving the nightmare behind me forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts on Evan's karma. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.